Here's something you've never questioned, even though it decided almost everything about your life. Your language, your laws, your money, your schooling, your health care, which wars your grandparents fought in, all of it determined by which side of a line you happen to be born on. And here's the strange part. If you went looking for that line, you'd find nothing there. No wall, usually, no fence, often not even a sign. The single most powerful fact about you is invisible. So it's worth asking a question almost nobody ever asks. Why do countries exist at all? The obvious answer is that they've simply always been there, that the world naturally comes divided into France-shaped and Japan-shaped pieces. So let's test that. Wind history back and look for countries. For roughly 95% of the time humans have existed, you won't find a single one. You'll find bands, clans, villages, chiefdoms, wandering herders, city-states, sprawling empires with blurry edges, but nothing like a modern country. And more importantly, you won't find anyone who feels like they belong to one. Ask a medieval peasant what they are, and they'd name their village, their lord, their faith, their family. The idea that they shared some deep identity with a stranger 300 miles away, a person they'd never meet speaking a dialect they couldn't understand, would have struck them as bizarre. Whatever countries are, humans clearly lived without them for a very long time, so something specific created them. 3 things, actually, and they arrived one at a time. The first was farmland. For as long as humans wandered, drawing lines on the ground was pointless. You moved with the seasons and the herds. But the moment people planted crops, everything changed because a field is the one thing you cannot carry away. Suddenly, it mattered enormously where your land ended and your neighbors began. Villages marked boundary stones. Rulers went further. A boundary around territory meant you knew exactly who owed you taxes, who owed you soldiers, and which trade routes were yours to skim. Notice what a border actually is underneath the politics. It's an answer to the oldest question in civilization: who controls what? Egypt was taxing farmland along the Nile with surveyed boundaries thousands of years ago. So that's our first answer. Countries exist to organize resources, but it's not enough. A tax district isn't a country. Rome had provinces, taxes, and borders galore, and yet nobody in it was a citizen of anything resembling a modern nation. Most were simply subjects, property, almost, of whoever currently ruled. Something else had to happen. The second ingredient arrived out of catastrophe. In the early 1600s, Europe tore itself apart in the 30 Years' War, a conflict so devastating that some German regions lost a third or more of their entire population. It was partly a war of religion, and partly a war about a question that sounds abstract but killed millions. Who has the right to rule a territory, and can outsiders interfere? When the exhausted powers finally gathered to make peace in Westphalia in 1648, the settlement they produced contained an idea that quietly became the operating system of the modern world: sovereignty. Within its borders, a state answers to no one above it. Its ruler decides its laws, its religion, its affairs, and other states in principle keep out. Historians debate how much changed on that actual day, but the principle it came to symbolize is the one we still live under. Look at any international crisis today, and you'll hear its vocabulary: territorial integrity, non-interference, recognized borders. That's Westphalia talking, nearly 4 centuries on. So now we have our second answer. Countries exist because rulers agreed on a rule: hard shells, no interference. But notice what's still missing. A sovereign state is a legal box. It says nothing about the people inside feeling like they belong together. A Westphalian king could rule 5 languages and 3 religions and care only that the taxes arrived. The thing you feel about your country, that it's yours, that its people are your people, still didn't exist. And the story of where that feeling came from is the strangest part of all. Consider France, surely one of the oldest, most solid nations on earth. At the time of the French Revolution in 1789, by the revolutionaries' own investigation, most of the people living in France could not speak French. They spoke Breton, Occitan, Basque, Alsatian, dozens of dialects. A majority couldn't hold a conversation in the national language, and for millions more it was a foreign tongue. France existed on maps and in tax rolls, but not yet in most of its people's heads. The nation, the feeling, had to be built. And build it they did. Schools taught one language, newspapers and cheap printing gave millions of strangers the same stories to care about on the same morning. Railways stitched regions together, anthems and flags and history lessons did the rest. Scholars have a beautiful name for what was being constructed: an imagined community. Not imaginary, and the consequences are utterly real, but imagined because a nation is a group of millions of people who will never meet, yet feel a kinship strong enough at the extreme to die for. Italy makes the point even more bluntly. When the Italian peninsula was unified into one kingdom in 1861, stitching together regions that had been separate states for 14 centuries, one of its founding statesmen is famously said to have remarked, "We have made Italy. Now we must make Italians." Read that again. The country came first. The people were manufactured afterwards. And that's the third answer, the real one. Countries exist because humans learned to tell a story big enough that millions of strangers could live inside it together. The borders organize the resources, sovereignty keeps other rulers out, but the story is what makes it a country. And that story, the one you were raised inside, it's roughly 200 years old, younger than the piano. Once you see that countries are made, not found, the world map starts looking very different. Because if lines are drawn by people, they're drawn by particular people on particular days, for particular reason, and sometimes with breathtaking carelessness. In 1884, diplomats from 14 powers gathered in a conference room in Berlin to set the rules for carving up Africa. Most had never set foot on the continent. In the years around that conference, Europeans drew borders across it with rulers, literally. Something like 2/5 of Africa's borders today are straight lines, slicing through hundreds of peoples, languages, and kingdoms, and binding rivals together inside the same new colonies. No African was consulted. Many of those lines are still there, and many of the conflicts along them trace straight back to that room. Or take 1947. Britain, leaving India in a hurry, handed the job of dividing the subcontinent to a London barrister named Cyril Radcliffe, a man who had never been east of Paris. He was given about 5 weeks. Working from outdated maps and census tables in secrecy, he drew the lines that split India from Pakistan, cutting through provinces, villages, even individual houses. When the border was published, one of the largest and bloodiest mass migrations in history followed. Over 10 million people crossing in both directions, and death tolls in the hundreds of thousands at minimum. Radcliffe declined his fee and never returned. 5 weeks, 1 pen, and over 1 billion people live with the consequences today. Maps, it turns out, aren't pictures of geography. They're records of decisions, snapshots of who had the power to hold the pen. Which raises an unsettling thought. If countries were invented, they can presumably be uninvented too, and they are, constantly and recently. In 1945, the United Nations was founded with 51 member states. Today it has 193. That's over 140 countries, most of the map, created within a single human lifetime. And the traffic runs both ways. In 1991, the Soviet Union, a superpower with tens of thousands of nuclear weapons, dissolved, and 15 countries appeared essentially overnight. Germany, split in two for 40 years, snapped back together. Czechoslovakia calmly voted itself out of existence and became 2 countries with a handshake. South Sudan, the world's newest country, arrived in 2011. It's younger than Instagram. People alive today have watched dozens of countries be born and die. The map on your wall isn't a fact. It's a photograph of one moment already out of date. So why do countries exist? Because they solved 3 problems in sequence. Farmland needed organizing, Rulers needed rules, and strangers needed a story that let millions of them cooperate, pay taxes, build institutions, and trust each other without ever meeting. That last one is the miracle, and it's the same miracle we found in the story of gold. Value, money, nations, the biggest structures in human life are agreements, running on nothing but our shared willingness to keep believing in them. A country is what happens when enough people imagine the same thing at once, and it works. Which leaves one last thought. If humans could invent something as enormous as countries and then persuade the whole species to live inside them, what else that feels natural was actually decided in a conference room. Here's one. The time on your clock right now, it's wrong, deliberately, and it was set by a committee. Why the entire planet agreed to lie about what time it is? That's the next story, and it's worth knowing. Thanks for watching. Please support the channel if you've learned something new, and we'll see you in the next video.